Our first speaker served as the 38th governor of Illinois. The cornerstones of his administration were children and fiscal discipline. When he left office after serving 2 terms, number 1, he had earned the highest approval rating in state history. Number 2, he had eliminated the backlog in payments of the state's bills. And number 3, he had given the state a surplus. And finally, he reduced the size of government. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Jim Edgar. Governor, sit down here. The second speaker is the executive director of Advance Illinois. Advance Illinois is an independent, statewide education policy and advocacy organization dedicated to ensuring that Illinois provides a world-class education to every student. She has taught at public high schools in Boston, San Francisco, and Chicago, all before going on to earn her law degree. Our next speaker graduated Phi Beta Kappa and magna cum laude from Brown University. She earned her master's degree in education from Stanford University and is a graduate of the University of Chicago Law School. Our next speaker, the second speaker, is married to her husband, Lenny, who is here. Lenny, where are you? Lenny, where are you? There we go. Stand up. Let everybody see you. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. And is the mother of 3 beautiful children, Jessica, Leah, and Sydney, all of whom attend or graduated from Chicago Public Schools. Ladies and gentlemen, Robin Steans. Governor? Where are you? All right, Governor, you're on.
Well, thank you, Jay. It's indeed my pleasure to be back here at the City Club, and I'm delighted to be here with Robin, though I feel a little inferior. I think of my educational credentials compared to hers. I'm not going to talk very long. I'd like to thank the City Club for inviting us to present our biannual report on the state of Illinois public education, and to thank all of you for joining us today. I might say to those of you who are sitting on the sides or behind some of these walls, you want to move your chairs. This is going to be a picture show, slideshow, so you want to see the slides, so feel free to move your chairs. Hopefully the fire marshal won't come in and complain. I am a founding co-chair of Advance Illinois, as has been said, a nonprofit which, for the last 7 years, has been an independent, objective voice promoting public education that prepares all Illinois students for college, career, and democratic citizenship. And let me say, that's democratic with a small d. I speak for my colleagues on the Advance Illinois Board in saying we believe education reform is not and should not be a partisan issue. In 2008, I joined with CEOs and teachers, downstaters and Chicagoans, Democrats and Republicans, many of whom are here today, to help found Advance Illinois because of our common understanding that strong public schools sustain a strong Illinois. Then and now, we saw the urgent need to improve our public schools and open the doors of opportunity for all students. But we can't move forward if we don't know where we stand. That's what's led us to create the state we're in, a comprehensive biennial report card on Illinois public education. We're pleased to be here today to release the 2014 version of our 3rd report today. As with previous editions, the report examines the Illinois' academic improvements, achievement gaps, and learning conditions, as well as how Illinois compares to other states on important measures such as access to high-quality early childhood education, fourth grade reading proficiency, and high school graduation rates. The state we're in analyzes an ambitious 55 metrics going back a decade to determine growth, gaps, and trends, providing a comprehensive look at the education system from birth through post-secondary. Please know we had a lot of help choosing the right measures and gathering the right data. Both were big undertakings, and we are deeply indebted to an advisory council that put many hours and lots of brain powers into getting this right. The full list of the council is on the back cover of this report. Right now, I want to acknowledge the institutional support of the Illinois State Board of Education, the Illinois Board of Higher Education, and the Illinois Community Colleges Board. I also would like to recognize the Advisory Council members present today: Albert Bennett, Pat Ford, Alicia Ginsberg, Emily Crone, Larry Stanton, Judy Wingan, and Tony Radin. Finally, I want to take note of the outstanding work done here and every day by the entire Advance Illinois team. On this report, special thanks goes to Project Director Jim O'Connor and writer Maureen Kelleher. The state we're in, 2014, measures Illinois' educational performance for early childhood through post-secondary education. Now more than ever, all Illinois children need an excellent education to ensure their success in life. With promising reforms underway, we see signs of progress in our numbers this year. That's the good news. But state leaders have set an ambitious goal. They want to have 60% of adults in our state holding a high-quality college credential by the year 2025, which is just 11 years from now. This number was not pulled out of the air. It reflects projections showing that by 2018, just 4 years, more than 2/3 of Illinois jobs will require post-secondary education. But the road ahead has gotten a bit tougher, even as we work harder to improve student outcomes. This year, for the first time, half of Illinois public school students come from low-income families, and the number of English language learners continues to grow. Schools will need to provide more supports to ensure all students have a shot at academic success. At the same time, and in the face of greater needs, funding for schools has been dropping. The bottom line here is simple. The health of our public schools is the foundation to the health of our state, and the standards for educational health is rising. To stay competitive, we must accelerate our progress. In the books on your table, please turn to page 4 and hold it open there. To measure the strength of our cradle-to-college pipeline, we've developed a ladder to readiness with steps Illinois students must climb to succeed. As we look at these key milestones, we see that there is good news and bad news. First, the good news. We have made progress on a number of these critical measures. Given the demographic changes and financial challenges facing Illinois, that's significant. But the troubling news is that despite that progress, only about 1/3 of our kids are reading by grade 4, ready for high school work, completing high school and college and career ready, and earning a post-secondary degree. We have much work to do. Now I'd like to turn the microphone over to Robin, who will walk us through Illinois' performance in each of these key milestones in more depth. Robin?
Thank you so much. And if I could just say, one of the best things about having begun work at Advance Illinois, and I've been here for a little over 7 years from the start, has been getting to know Governor Edgar, who I know his approval ratings out in the public are extraordinarily high and probably, continue to look awfully good, but they're pretty darn high here too. And it's been really, honestly, Governor Edgar, one of the highlights of this experience. And I'm also really we have an incredible board. It's one thing to say we're bipartisan and we're independent. It's another thing if you put faces behind it. So I do hope you take a look at the list of our board members. I know it was up here, but I also want to introduce some of the board members that are in the room today. So you've got Lou Collins. He's the former president of Illinois Institute of Technology. Lou, if you'd stand or wave. You got another brainy, very funny guy, Craig Linval, who was a former classroom teacher, went on to teaching entrepreneurship. So Craig from the greater Effingham area, for those of you who maybe don't get down to central Illinois. You've got Sylvia Puente, who heads the Latino Policy Forum. Always manages to ask the particularly hard question in the middle of a board conversation, so thank you for that, Sylvia. Jim Franzik, who was already introduced, so thanks, Jim. Keeps everybody on his toes. Judy Irwin, who knows more about state government, more about higher education, used to run the Board of Higher Education, who's here today. Am I missing anybody? I don't think I am. So it is, I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on. Oh, and Tim Knowles, my goodness. I'm going to pay for this later. I know I'm going to pay for this later. Tim Knowles, who runs the Urban Education Institute, also a former teacher, a former principal, and who always manages to make those unbelievably intellectually pithy things in a very folksy way. It's a real gift. So we are genuinely diverse. We genuinely represent a different point of view. Everybody shows up to meetings. So when we talk about things, it really is reflective of the points of view of an incredibly thoughtful, smart, and committed group of folks. That's what they all have in common. So I'm delighted you're all here. It's cold, I realize that, and you came out to learn about get a bunch of data. So you guys already have passed some, and you made it here instead of Maggiano. So you passed all sorts of IQ tests just from that. And I am going to try to talk even faster than I usually do so that I can get through a lot of it and still leave time for you to ask very hard questions of Governor Edgar. We're going to start at the beginning. And actually, Jim, I am going to let you do the clicking. So you're back there. Hopefully at this point there isn't a person in the room who doesn't know that it is incredibly important that we get kids off to a strong start, which by the way reminds me that Sarah Slaughter is here, who also helped on the advisory council. So Sarah, if you would wave from the McCormick Foundation, right there. If you can get a kid into a high-quality early childhood program, you can stop a lot of learning gaps before they even begin. So it's unbelievably important that we do that well. And if you want to look at the health of an overall state and how they're doing educationally, you have to know how they're doing there. Unfortunately, this critical measure, we're lacking critical information. We don't know how ready our children are as they're making the transition from early childhood to kindergarten. We don't know how they're doing social and emotionally, health-wise, developmentally, academically, cognitively, et cetera. And so as a result of that, we are, well, I'll get to that in just a second. We are piloting a kindergarten individual development survey, which is a new kindergarten readiness tool that's designed to tell us in a developmentally appropriate way, no pencil and paper test for little 5-year-olds, in a developmentally appropriate way, how are our kids doing? When you make a serious investment in early childhood, does it pay off? And does it give you information about where you need to be doing more or doing something different or doing something smarter? So we look forward to having that information for you. It is scheduled to roll out statewide in the next couple of years. So we are hoping that we're going to turn that question mark that you see on your ladder into some good solid information that we can then work with at the local level and at the state level. In the meantime, so it's an incomplete until we get that information. In the meantime, we look at a whole number of other measures. How many 3- and 4-year-olds are we managing to serve? What kind of health screenings and developmental screenings are we able to get kids early on? How many home visits and home visitation programs do we have in place? How qualified are our instructors? What are the environments that they're learning in? All stuff we want to know if we want to understand how well we're serving our kids. And unfortunately there we've dropped. We dropped from 14th to 15th if you look at our national standing. It's one of our, actually always been one of our bright spots. Why did it drop? Jim's going to click. One of the most critical sets of measures is how many kids are we serving? Nowhere in the rest of the system does what we invest translate more readily. And as you all know, in 2007, there was a much vaunted, very admirable effort to try and really expand and create preschool for all. How do we make sure we get every kid served? And we made a big push, and we grew the number of kids. So by 2009, Illinois was serving 95,000 young children, which was terrific. And what's happened? We've had a deepening fiscal crisis, and we've undone virtually all of that growth. We're virtually back where we were when we started. So if we know that is critical, we've got a lot of work to do. So let's turn and take a look. How does it look when we start to move into the K-12 system? Well, as the governor mentioned, there is good news and there is worrisome news. When you take it all together, our K-12 system ranks 30th among the states. So we continue to earn a C-, which is unchanged from last year in 2012. But I do want to remind you again about the demographic shift. There are 3 things that have been happening in the state, any one of which would account, if they were in place, you would expect to see scores dip. First, you do have a more challenging population. It costs more and it takes more effort, and you have to work a little bit differently to really do the right job for low-income kids, for kids who have language learning needs and other issues. And we have seen those numbers climb and climb. We're now majority students from low income and majority minority student population. In the teeth of that, we also cut funding significantly, as you heard Governor Edgar say. And finally, we're rolling out entirely new, very rigorous standards, the biggest change in what our kids need to learn and what instruction needs to look like we've probably ever tackled. Any one of those things and you might see a dip. In the face of all 3 of those things, here's the news. 4th grade reading, which is the single most powerhouse predictor of how a kid is going to do, we inched up. We're at 34%. So the fact that we were able to make gains, that's really good news. It is worth celebrating. It is worth commenting on. And then the minute you're done celebrating and commenting, you got to look at that and say 34%. That's not good enough. It's not acceptable that 2/3 of our children are not positioned to do well going forward, that 2/3 of the kids are at serious risk of not making it through high school, or if they do make it through high school, not really having the skills that they need to be successful out in the real world. And more troubling, the small gains that we made, because we're not the only state who's been facing demographic changes, we fell in our ranking compared to other states. We now rank, I believe, 32nd in the nation on this critical measure. And maybe that wouldn't matter if you're only competing with kids around the block, around the corner, across town, or even across state, but we all know that is simply not the case anymore. The other thing, and I talk about this whenever we do, is those are our average numbers. If you peel back the aggregate data, it also shows that we've got other, even more serious concerns. We are not serving all students equally well. A shockingly low 14% of African American students, 18% of Latino students are reading at grade level by 4th grade. Think about what that suggests for what's going to happen going forward in their lives, in their families' lives, in their communities' lives, and for the state. The other thing that's important to look at is poverty. Poverty is increasingly becoming even more predictive than some other factors in a child's life. And one of the things we looked at in this report was not just what is the achievement gap by poverty, which is among the worst in the country, I'm here to tell you, even worse. We look even worse when you look at our low-income achievement gaps than we do for our other gaps. We're at the very, very bottom. We're in the bottom 5 states. The achievement gaps by income are across all racial groups, which is something I think frequently people don't pause to look at. And they continue to fall further behind. And let's take one deeper look at that, Jim, if you would. Over the last 8 years, the performance of our low-income students improved 2 percentage points in 4th grade reading, but our rank against other states, again, dropped to 44th. 43 other states are outperforming our low-income students. In those same 8 years, our non-low-income students, students from more affluent or middle-income families, gained 11 percentage points, and they improved their ranking by 7 points in 4th grade reading. And so you're seeing a divide that is not going to be sustainable if we don't address it. So closing that has got to be a serious priority for the state going forward. So I want to move up to 8th grade. How ready are our kids as they're transitioning from elementary school to high school? And what we look at as a good proxy of that is we look at 8th grade math. And here you've got some good news. This is where we had the most solid gains. Both absolutely, we moved from 33% to 36%, but we also gained relative to our peers. So that is terrific news. It is not nearly far enough, as you can all know and readily expect, but you got to take these at a time, and it's been a steady curve up. The other bright bit of news within that is if you look at the gap between Latino students and other students and Caucasian students, and particularly because we have an increasingly large Latino population, the fact that we are figuring out how to do that and how to close those gaps is very encouraging and worth commenting on. Which gets us to our high school graduation rates. And here there are some pieces of good news, but the overall news is still troubling. The good news is we've got more kids who are earning diplomas, which is terrific. Federal estimates show that 8 out of every 10 Illinois students are graduating high school. Our most recent number, by the way, is for 2012. And there are reasons to believe that I'll get to in a minute why those numbers are going to continue to go up. One of the things that the report talks about, it's the first time we've been able to talk about this number statewide, is that we now report both at the state level in its official report card, the number of freshman students who are on track to matriculate on time with their class to sophomore status without failing a major class. So are they on track, ready to move on from freshman to sophomore year? Turns out, according to the Consortium on Chicago School Research and all those brainy people there, that's why I'm pointing at Tim Knowles, because he gets to work with those brainy people, is that's a very powerful predictor of whether a kid's going to go on to graduate. And the freshmen on track numbers for the state are higher still than our current graduation rates. So you can expect to see those numbers continue to grow. More on Chicago and how it looks on that in just a minute. The other piece of good news is that you've got more students taking challenging courses. The number of students who are taking AP classes and who are going on to earn AP credit continues to climb. Illinois actually this is one of the places where we really stand out nationally. So not only are we improving, but we look awfully good nationally. And I want to make 2 points about this. First of all, it matters whether you take an AP class, even if you don't, because some of you are looking at that saying, well, those aren't really good passing rates. I mean, shouldn't more of them pass? And that is a good point, and you are right, and it would be better. But here's something to make you feel better still. Taking an AP class has independent merit. A child who has been exposed to AP opportunities is going to be better prepared going into college and will do better there. So yes, you want them to pass, not to say that you don't. It's to say that the more kids who take it and get exposed to what they're going to see in college, the better. And those numbers are continuing to grow. And apparently there was a press release this morning. CPS continues to grow those numbers. So thank you very much, CPS. That will help our state numbers grow also. So that's good news. But here's the troubling news. I'd love to stop there and tell you that's all it is. But one of the things that we like to look at here, and we don't generally report that, I think people are getting better about, you want to know how many kids are graduating, cross-reference with how many of them are graduating truly college and career ready. That's what you want to know, right? Because if I'm graduating more kids and they ain't ready, I'm not really getting it done. So that's what we look at, and that's what we put on the ladder, and that number hasn't moved. So we've still got work to do. We need to grow the graduation, but we've still got to work harder on making sure they've got the academic skills. Now, we did something a little bit different in this report. We took a deep dive look at Chicago. And I want to tell you why. Every time that we release this report, we're looking at the state of Illinois. We're a statewide organization. And every time when it's not as good news as everybody hopes, the general response around the state is, well, it must be Chicago. Chicago must be dragging us down, because Chicago does have a more challenging level of intensive need than the rest of the state does. The Lord knows, as we've said, that level of need is not only growing, it is also spreading, that you have more schools and more districts who are working with low-income children and children with other special needs. So we looked. We said, maybe that's the case. We ought to report on that if that's the case. Well, it turns out it's not. Chicago's actually been outpacing state gains, and it's been doing so steadily for 6-7 years. So these are cumulatively showing the level of gains in Chicago versus the rest of the state. But what I can tell you is that if you look at that, that's been a steady increase over each of the years, not spiky. So with over 20% of the student population, it matters how Chicago does, and it turns out they're pulling their weight. So, and there's another bit of good news, lest you think that's the only good news I'm going to share here. Chicago was one of the first, thanks to the Consortium on Chicago School Research. See, Tim, I'm making it up to you. This is why you're not going to get upset that I skipped you. The Consortium on Chicago School Research came up with this terrific freshman on track rate, but it really only matters if you use it, if you actually look at it and say, I'm going to figure out who those kids are, find them early in freshman year, get on them and make sure they're ready to go and get them back on track. Well, it turns out that's exactly what Chicago's been doing. They've done other things too, i.e., it's never any one thing. But they focus like a laser beam. Some high schools in particular have done an unbelievably outstanding job, and as a result, look what's happened to graduation rates. It was more likely that a kid who was enrolling as a freshman in a Chicago public school was going to drop out than graduate. And now we're up to, let's just call it 70%. I know it's 69, but it's like 69.4. Let's call it 70. That's a huge uptick. And again, their freshmen on track numbers are even higher still. There might even be somebody from Chicago who tell me exactly what the freshman on track number is. 84.1%. So if that holds true, we can expect to see another 5% move in this over the next 3 years. So that's great news. So now we're going to look over at postsecondary. And as Governor Edgar noted, and as he lives well, he comes from the world of higher ed, never has postsecondary completion mattered more for students' long-term success. I shouldn't say you come from that, but you spent a lot of time there of late. So while there are some bright spots, we've got challenges here too. And we rate 16th among the states for the number of adults who hold college credentials, but that's partly because we are an importer of college degrees. We still are an attractive place despite all of the rhetoric for people to come, and you do see an influx of adults who have college degrees. So 43% of our native-born adults aged 25 to 34 have an associate's degree or higher, but 63% of people who move here do. So when you look at the overall adult population, it looks good, and that is important, Lord knows. We want to keep attracting folks who have that, but we are not doing a strong enough job getting the completion rates up among our high school graduates. And what's really notable there, and there are two questions. One, why is that? And what can we do about it? But let me go here. Our post-secondary system rates 25th in the country, and we've dropped to a C overall if you look at the combined measures, down from a C+. And what's been interesting about that is that the word that people need most secondary is getting out. You've got more and more kids who are actually enrolling. And the other thing that you might not know, that the complexion of kids who are enrolling in our public institutions, 2-year and 4-year, matches the demographics of the population at large. Which I have to tell you, nobody on my team expected when we first saw it. That the complexion of people who are enrolling in public institutions of higher education, 2- and 4-year, match the demographics of the population at large. Now, partly that's driven by the fact that the overall 2- and 4-year enrollment is dominated by community colleges. Well over half of people who are in post-secondary in community college system. But that's actually good news. So we're trying. People are enrolling. If that's part of the equation, they're doing it. But unfortunately, they're not yet completing. And part of the problem there, Jim, can we move on? They're not, the level that are graduating from college have dropped. And there, too, there's a number of things going on. Turns out poverty is more of a predictor than it ought to be. It's a pretty driving predictor. No matter how ready you are, you're not as likely to stay in school at the post-secondary level as more middle-income counterparts are. And the cost of college in Illinois now is off the charts. We have been at the 47th, 49th, hovering near the very, very bottom. And as Governor Edgar would tell you, back in his day, we were one of the most generous. We had an unbelievably generous MAP grant program, and the cost of tuition was something that people could readily afford. So just at the time that we're telling people it matters, just at the time that they're getting the message, we're making it unbelievably difficult for them to do that. So that is really the end of what I wanted to go through. And I am going to turn it back over to Governor Edgar because there are some common themes here, and he's going to point them out to you.
Thank you, Robin. Robin has more energy than anybody I think I've ever worked with. I just wish I'd have known her when I was governor. We could have used her in about 4 departments. Perhaps somebody can find a full-time job for you. The problem is straightforward. Our education systems are struggling to serve low-income students. As I mentioned at the beginning, more than half of Illinois students now come from low-income households. Thousands of children statewide receive a free breakfast, lunch, and dinner in their school cafeteria. Achievement gaps within minority groups based on income looms large. And Illinois' achievement gap between low-income students and their better-off classmates remains among the nation's largest. Our most vulnerable students need support to get on and stay on the ladder of readiness for college and careers. Yet just as their numbers are rising, our resources to support them are disappearing. We cannot ignore the fact that Illinois is spending $1 billion less this year on early childhood and K through 12 than we did in 2009. The magnitude of this reduction threatens to curtail student opportunities and stall improvement efforts. Even in these difficult times, our most important investment must be to educate our students. This is vital for the state's economic and social future. Making real change to these gaps requires real investments. Prudent, strategic investments in our schools can give thoughtful school leaders and teachers the resources they need to drive teaching and learning for all children. Our schools, our children, deserve adequate, equitable, transparent, and accountable public support to protect, sustain, and improve the state we're in. We must lay the foundation for the children of Illinois. Thank you very much.
If you have a question, our people are out there, especially Jack with the silver chalice. Okay. This goes to you. Guess if you can guess the person who wrote this question. Why are Illinois state colleges, universities so much more expensive for residents than those in neighboring states? A fellow named Harrison Steans.
Oh, that was definitely for Governor Edgar, actually. There's no question.
Governor, no disrespect to your colleague, but what does that say?
Yeah, no, I think it's you. Yeah, I think it's you.
You know you're in trouble.
Want to take this one? Go ahead, Eric.
So why are our public institutions so much more expensive here? Part of it is we're literally not able to make the investments in our institutions. The state pickup per every $10 spent, I think, is now in half of what it used to be. So, and I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but it may be that we used to pick up 7 out of 10 every dollar cost for public higher education here, and we're down to 3 or 4. And that's before you factor in the MAP grants, the Monetary Assistance Program, which again were unbelievably generous in Governor Edgar's day, for example, and have really been frozen. They just haven't gained, and so we have really scissor cut in both of those directions. And I'm sure it's more complicated than that if you talk to somebody from the higher ed community, but though there's no question that that's got a direct effect. And now I have triggered you to want to say something to that? That way you moved up?
Well, to me, I think that's one of the most crucial issues we face in Illinois. I mean, the whole reason to have young people do well in school is so they can go to college and do well and go out and find a job and have a middle-class life, which is unfortunately slipping away. And if you can't afford to go to college, then why make the effort in 4th grade and in junior high and high school? So it's a real problem. And it's unfortunate because Illinois led the nation 15 years ago when it came to making sure that higher education was affordable for all students. And we've fallen way, way down. And I think we need to make that a priority again. And you can't just say, well, higher education do that. I think the people of this state have to say we want that done. I think too often there's this myth that higher education has fat budgets, and there might be some needs to rearrange some of that money. I've spent a few years at a university, and I'm not saying that everything is spent efficiently, but we can't just ignore and continue to cut money that needs to go to make sure students have that opportunity. Because without the opportunity of higher education, you cannot realize the American dream.
Can I just add one more thing? High-performing countries, Finland, they actually pay for students to go on to higher ed. So what the public covers extends much further than we do. And so it was interesting to see when Chicago, there's some folks here who are from city colleges, Sherrod Gordon, Brian Fabes has spent a lot of time there, to see the city colleges in the city work out saying, look, can we pay for some number of Chicago grads to go on the public nickel through a couple of more years of school. So whether we can afford that when we're so unbelievably fiscally challenged is an awfully tough bet. But understand, that's what a lot of other high-performing countries, they're extending their notion of what public education should include.
Okay. You know, Governor, you may find this hard to believe, but there are many Republicans in the City Club of Chicago.
That's good.
Just so you know that, because as you know,
Probably
we are...
a few more now.
Not yet. Well, there will be, though. The white line down the middle of the road, that's where the City Club drives, either side. And one of the most, well, put it like this. Mark Weidermiller basically thinks Reagan was a leftist, but that's beside the point. Here's his question. Remember, you still have the mug, Mark. Do you feel SB 16 will cut funding at some schools? You know what SB 16
yeah,
is?
SB 16 is the new school aid formula bill that came out of the Senate last year and is now in the House. And there's nothing more controversial, nothing more difficult, as I explained to him when we first started Advance Illinois, than to play around with the school aid formula, because that's how you distribute the money. And I don't need to tell a bunch of people in Chicago who are involved in politics, money's what it's all about in many cases. And it's extremely controversial. And when you make changes you're going to have winners and losers unless you hold harmless, and that means you got to put a lot of new money into the formula, and there's not a lot of new money in Springfield these days. So there's no doubt the way that Senate Bill 16 is drafted as it currently stands, and I think whatever finally passes, there's going to be winners and losers. But the reason behind 16 is to re-establish and to update a theme that has been the theme for school aid in Illinois for many, many years, which I subscribe to. You help the poorer school districts. The wealthier school districts, they don't need the help. Now, that means their taxpayers are going to carry the load more, but the feeling is they're in a position to do that. So you have many poor school districts, and most of those school districts are in downstate Illinois. And so there's no doubt Senate Bill 16 will reallocate how that money is distributed. And some of the districts who are viewed as wealthier based on property valuation are not going to get as much from the state. They don't get that much right now anyway.
I was hoping you'd say that.
Yeah. I mean, you look at those percentages and say, oh, that's a lot. It's not a lot because they don't get much. So I don't think it will have the effect that some of them think it will. But I do know the poorer school districts who have real serious problems providing anything close to adequate education in many parts of the state, that could make a big difference. I remember a few years ago when I was governor, we looked at this and we made changes. And we did put more resources into the poorer school districts. That's been 20 years. That's a long time. There's been a lot of changes. And it's time, I think we need to take another look at that school aid formula. Now, the way Senate Bill 16 is currently probably is not the way, if it passes, it will pass. There will be give and take as we move through the legislative process. But I do think after 20 years, we need to take a look at that. Because if the formula is not working properly, then that means we've got children that are in schools that aren't going to have the resources necessary to provide just the minimal quality education. So that's, somebody's going to lose, there's no doubt about it. But I don't think, again, those who lose will lose as much as those could gain. And if they don't gain, then I think we're going to have some real serious long-term problems.
Okay, good answer. Good answer. And lucky for this audience that all the suburban legislators are in Springfield.
And you thought this was accidental.
I had to admit, I had a little trouble 20 years ago convincing suburban legislators.
I was in your office when that happened with Mr.
Yeah.
Vallis, by the way.
Yeah.
Just, I know you don't remember. We'll skip the second part about 401k and all that kind of stuff, Mark. I think you got a great answer. Moving on. Can you, this is from Crystal? Well, it's a great question. I'm still going to read it. Can you speak about, no, we don't want to read that one yet. Question. That's the end one. This is for you, Ms. Steans. Define proficiency for fourth grade reading. Can't assume that we all know the meaning of the many definitions. What does proficiency mean for fourth grade reading?
Boy, if I were, so I taught high school, just to be clear, so there are lots of really esoteric ways you can break that down. Basically what you're looking for by third grade, we use fourth grade because that's when the national assessment takes a look across the board, and it is a more comparable, rigorous way of looking at whether kids really are where they should be by that grade. Third grade reading is what people usually pay attention to, and what it really means is that you are now ready to read to learn, that you can not only decode words, sort of sound them out and read them, you can not only put together sentences, but you actually know what they mean, you're reading for meaning, and it's not getting in your way, it's actually facilitating you learning at a deeper level about content. So at a high level from a high school teacher, that's effectively where you're switching over to that's what you're looking to do by third grade, fourth grade.
Okay, we have two more questions. A late starter, I think this might have been a provisional question. You know, crowd just governor, you know.
I got it.
Okay, thank you. Well, I know, we're not in central Illinois anymore, we know that. Okay, Lawrence Massal, Civic Federation, frequent speaker at the City Club, sitting right over there. If Governor Rauner is to be successful, what regret from your, Jesus. Nice technical question, Mr. Massal. This is obvious for you, Mr. Edgar. If Governor Rauner is to be successful, what regret from your first term as governor should the governor-elect avoid? Sandbag is part of our tradition.
I think the inauguration.
Not getting sick.
No, I'm thinking, I'm getting sick just thinking about 25 years ago. I think one of the things, you're not going to solve all the fiscal problems in one session. And if you think you have, you haven't. So I think you have to think the long term. We thought we had solved it the first session, only to find out a recession hit Illinois, and we had to come back halfway through the fiscal year, which is the most difficult thing to do, and to cut everybody's appropriation again after they'd already been spending at a rate they thought was going to be sustained for the whole year. So, I think you have to look long term a little more than perhaps we didn't think we had the luxury of looking long term, but I wish we had it. And the other thing is, and this is something that somebody told me once was always good about if you're governor and you sit out and you come back, that when you come back, you know what to really worry about, what not to worry about. And I worried about everything, and I really think you got to prioritize your worries. And I wish I could have done that the first 6 months I was governor, and just concentrated on what, one, I really could do something about, and two, had to be done. It probably would have saved me from 3 years later spending time out here in Good Samaritan, having him put things into my heart, because just say, you're not going to like some of the things Governor Rauner is going to do or have to do. It's an extremely stressful job, but I just would say try to kind of, as Phil Rock told me at the end of the first session, Governor, you got to loosen up. And I would say, besides kind of look long term, you got to kind of be a little looser than I was probably the first 8 years I was governor.
Well, Governor, not only did you answer that question, you answered the other question. So there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, how about a big round of applause for our two speakers?